It took nearly a decade to complete, a landmark as important to the region as any other, crucial to the founding and prosperity of Bismarck. It has been Bismarck's direct link to the Great Lakes, Pacific Coast, and the rest of the nation for more than 140 years. An icon whose days could sadly be numbered and soon disappear with history. The historic Northern Pacific Railroad Bridge with your host Randy Hoffman on History Talk, where we step back through local history to explore the people, places, and events that shaped our community. History Talk streams exclusively Thursdays at 10 a.m. on KFYR+. Bismarck's historic railroad bridge was a key component in Northern Pacific completing its transcontinental railroad. Its importance on Bismarck and the railroad cannot be underestimated, and its construction was a feat of engineering for its time. Bismarck, founded as Edwinton in 1872, was always intended to be the railroad crossing at the Missouri River, although where this crossing would precisely occur was up for debate for years. Originally, the crossing was planned to be at the mouth of the Heart River across from Fort McKean, later Fort Abraham Lincoln. The original crossing location was planned because it was located at a narrower, shallower bend of the river for a shorter bridge both lengthwise and heightwise, resulting in a lower cost. Later studies indicated the ground was not strong enough to support an iron train bridge at this location. There are other reasons cited why the crossing and corresponding railroad was relocated north, including land claim disputes. Not only was the railroad shifted north, the bridge itself was built even further north from the railroad itself, which attributes to the sharp northern bend just west of historic Camp Hancock that we still see today. This was done to drive pier pilings into blue clay. One consideration would have positioned the bridge 4 or 5 miles north of the city. Where it was ultimately built, estimates of the day called for a 2-mile-long bridge. River diking on the west bank narrowed the river channel to about 1,200 feet, and the resulting bridge was only 1,426 feet long, divided into 3 main 300-foot spans and 2 shorter 100-foot spans. It was reported to stand 70 feet above the low water mark. The railroad reached Bismarck just before the Panic of 1873 abruptly halted all railroad construction. It wouldn't be until October 21, 1882, that Northern Pacific finally opened its Great Iron Bridge, spanning the Missouri River between Bismarck and Mandan. Nearly 10 years later, the lack of a bridge during those years impeded full usage of the nearly completed Northern Transcontinental Railroad. Weather permitting, trains could be ferried across the river in warmer months, and temporary track laid down across the frozen river during the winter, an achievement that received national attention. Neither of these were ideal, or guarantees, and rarely done. The bridge's completion date is commonly misreported. Nearly every source, including very legitimate sources, cite the bridge's completion as October 1883, when in fact it was 1 year earlier, in October 1882, as proven by newspapers of the time. Why this common inaccuracy? Most likely, it's because the official Golden Spike ceremony marking the Northern Pacific's railroad completion occurred in 1883, and the bridge is often directly associated with the railroad's completion. Indeed, the bridge's completion was a milestone event for the railroad. By this time, only about 300 miles of track were unfinished between Minnesota and the Pacific coast, over the difficult Rocky Mountains, and most of it was already graded. Work was being completed at an astonishing rate of 1.5 miles per day. Traffic on the western line was steadily increasing, partially propelled by rapid development of the Yellowstone Valley. Lack of a completed bridge, and its unknown final location, impeded Bismarck's early development and financial investment. Buildings were still wooden and intended to be easily relocated, as there was doubt that a bridge would ever be completed, or where. This all changed with the bridge's opening, and corresponding railroad soon after. Now, Bismarck was highlighted as the important city it was originally envisioned to be. One newspaper of the time hailed Bismarck as the Omaha to the Northwest, Investment into Bismarck immediately increased at a rapid pace. Massive brick buildings were erected, the biggest of which was the First National Bank on the northwest corner of 4th Street and Main Avenue, destroyed in the 1898 fire. Another, the Gothic-style Dakota block on the northeast corner of 2nd Street and Main Avenue, still stands today. More importantly, Bismarck may never have become Dakota Territory's capital in 1883 without the completed railroad and bridge. Roughly 5 years after construction abruptly halted, Northern Pacific established a work camp on the west side of the Missouri River to continue its line. By December 1878, the work camp site was chosen and the new county seat for Morton County was christened Mandan, named for the Native American tribe who once occupied the land. Several other names were considered, including simply Morton. In February 1879, General Thomas Rosser employed about 50 men to lay down temporary track across nature's ice bridge, the Frozen River, directly connecting Bismarck and Mandan for the first time. Its primary purpose was to transport supplies for the railroad. By the time of its discontinuation on March 11th, 538 carloads of material had been transported across the frozen river. By this time, track was laid to about 5 miles west of the Missouri River, and efforts were well underway to recruit around 500 men for grading the westward line and constructing a bridge to span the river. General laborers were paid between $1.25 and $1.50 per day, and bridge contractors starting around $3 a day. In April 1880, Northern Pacific studied miles of riverfront to determine the best crossing. One contender was the original planned crossing across from Fort Abraham Lincoln, where the river narrowed to less than 1,000 feet. However, the ground was weaker here, so it was decided to narrow the river artificially, where stronger footings to support a bridge could be placed. Also, diking the river's western bank cost less than rerouting the railroad south to take nature's advantage of Fort Lincoln's crossing. By June, the bridge's final location was more or less decided, within less than 300 feet of its existing line. This location wouldn't require considerable reconstruction of the line and contained suitable grounding. Its design was decided by the following month. Northern Pacific officially approved the bridge's construction on December 16, 1880. Constructing the bridge involved 3 major elements: river rectification, including diking, the bridge itself, such as the piers and superstructure, and the approaches on each end. Dike work commenced almost immediately in fall 1880. Completing its foundation, they constructed a wired willow mattress for the dike, which is a technique to counter erosion. In this case, made from willows to revegetate the shore. In January 1881, cottonwood logs were placed onto the mattress to wall in stone and frozen earth for the dike. The severe winter season of 1880 to 1881 resulted in regional flooding, by some accounts the severest witnessed to this day, as ice rushed down the river with, quote, unusual violence. The dike remained mostly intact until a river current eroded about 200 feet during the spring and summer. Even more impactful, the navigable river channels shifted west of the dike toward the Mandan side. It was unsure which channel would become permanent, so engineers planned for both possibilities until it gradually shifted back to the east. In May 1881, engineers unsuccessfully attempted to close the west channel with a pile bridge. When the river receded, another attempt commenced in July, and the pile bridge was completed by August. Channel silt completely filled in the west channel by early winter. The bridge deck was built to be 50 feet above the high-level river mark. The impressive height was attributed to the high bluffs to the east to compensate for the unpredictable river levels caused by ice jams. The deck rests on 4 granite piers, which were built for the dual purpose as icebreakers through its steel-covered points placed against the current. George Morrison was the chief engineer and superintendent of the bridge's construction. In January 1881, Northern Pacific awarded contracts for the bridge itself. Quarrying for the piers began in April from multiple sources in Minnesota. Ground was first broken on May 12, with work for the east abutment. Foundation work for the easternmost pier began the following day and was completed on November 20th. The caissons used to construct the piers in the river channel itself were 74 feet by 26 feet by 17 feet, made of pine framing with 3-inch oak plank encased with 82,000 pounds of iron. The working chamber, where laborers would work in the depths of the river to build the piers, was 7 feet high. The caissons were built on shore before getting towed into position to be submerged using 500 cubic yards of concrete placed above the working chamber. Air was pumped into the working chamber to displace water for the workers. The second caisson, launched August 6, 1881, proved particularly difficult to submerge since a sandbar had formed between the shore and intended river placement. Thus, the caisson was launched downstream a quarter mile and towed against the current to its destination. The approach spans on each end were completed by May 1882. The first of the longer bridge span was erected between the easternmost piers, with the first iron placed on July 27th and the span completed on August 12th. The second span was completed by September 9th and the final span on October 7th. By this point, only the deck floor and some minor finishes were needed before the bridge's dedication that same month. What many may not know is that tunneling the river was also being considered in 1880. There were multiple reasons for considering a tunnel instead of a bridge, chiefly cost and time. It was estimated that an iron bridge of, quote, great height and length, then planned to be nearly 2 miles long, would cost $1.5 million. Adjusted for inflation, that's more than $40 million today, as opposed to $600,000 to $750,000 for a tunnel, about half the cost, which could also have been completed quicker. There were also concerns over foundation grounding and common ice jams. The tunnel would have begun its westward descent at the Sheraton House, where today's historic depot now stands, and extend almost 13,000 feet, one of the longest in the world at the time, to a depth of 20 feet below the riverbed. It seems that Northern Pacific was never fully committed to the idea of a tunnel, however, and quickly abandoned the idea in favor of a bridge. The tunnel concept was pitched to Northern Pacific by Mr. H. Clark, a railroad contractor who previously built the impressive Boston Waterworks Tunnel and selfishly sought the Bismarck project. In April 1905, Northern Pacific let a contract to replace the original superstructure, comprising mostly iron, with steel that could handle heavier loads. When first built, train loads of 400 tons were the norm, but that weight load had roughly quadrupled, and the original superstructure was deemed inadequate. After some modifications, the original superstructure was repurposed for a bridge spanning the Columbia River at Pasco, Washington. The original granite piers, which still support the bridge to this day, were shored up at this time too. In particular, the easternmost pier had been an ongoing problem, shifting towards the river. More recently, in 2017, BNSF Railway, the successor to Northern Pacific, announced intentions to replace the historic bridge. In an effort to save the icon, a local resident took up a petition with hopes to turn it into a walking bridge. The National Trust for Historic Preservation placed the bridge on its annual list of top 11 most endangered places in 2019. Despite efforts to save the bridge, in April 2023, BNSF was granted the final approval to begin bridge replacement. The replacement bridge will be built to the north of the existing historic structure, which is likely to be demolished. Dirt work began moving in July. The entire project is expected to take 4 years to complete. I invite you to check out my 2 Bismarck history books. They are available to purchase on Amazon and select local bookstores. Copies are also available at the Bismarck Public Library. Visit bismarckbook.com for more information. That was our look at the historic Northern Pacific Railroad Bridge. Next, we'll learn about Dan's Supermarket. Is there a local history topic you'd like to be featured? Email suggestions to historytalk@kfyrtv.com.